He's not the type to exaggerate or fabricate stories. He's one of the most honest, no-nonsense people I know. Very grounded, not into ghost stories or horror movies. Just a down-to-earth guy who enjoys boats and structure. Asterisk shared this story with me in the summer of 2022. I had to ask him to tell it multiple times because of how unsettling it was, okay? And every time, the details never changed. Asterisk, this goes back to 2017, when he was stationed at a remote lighthouse off the coast of Maine for a 2-week maintenance shift. The place was called Matanus Rock, a harsh, jagged island accessible only by boat or helicopter. There's nothing there but a lone lighthouse and a separate shed for fuel and equipment. The island has no connection to the power grid, no plumbing, and almost no cell reception. While the lighthouse is mostly automated, it still requires periodic physical checks, which is why the Coast Guard sends someone out every year. Normally, it's a one-person post, but due to strange electrical issues, the year before, they sent 2 people, this time Nate and a guy named Russell. Asterisk, the first few days passed uneventfully. Windy, repetitive, and dull. They'd check the lights, mechanical systems, test backup power, refill the generator, and clean salt buildup from the equipment. Nights were spent reading, eating basic meals, and playing cards. It's isolated, but nothing out of the ordinary. Asterisk, on the 4th night though, things changed. Okay. Nate woke up around 2 a.m. with a strange sensation like pain or illness. Just an odd heaviness in the air. He described it like the tension before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear and quiet. Asterisk, when he sat up, he noticed something was off. The lighthouse beacon wasn't rotating. The light is supposed to sweep out over the sea every few seconds. Any failure like that is serious. Asterisk, he woke Russell and they climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the beacon chamber. The gears that spin the light were moving, but the beam itself wasn't turning. Something was stuck in the mechanism, a large, soaked piece of dark fabric, maybe an old coat or a heavy blanket. It was slimy and smelled of rotting seaweed. Asterisk, the odd part was how it got there. The room was locked, windows sealed, and no way for animals or wind to bring something like that in. They pulled it out, threw it outside, and chalked it up as a strange fluke. But the next night, it happened again. Some random guy showing up wasn't comforting. It was the opposite. If anything, it made things more unsettling. Why was this guy creeping along behind us? What was he even doing out there? Asterisk, I told him. Nah, we're good, and motioned to sofa to keep walking. I let her move ahead while I stayed behind her, keeping an eye out. But as we kept going, so did he. He didn't say anything else, didn't try to clarify or push further. He just kept following same pace, same distance. Asterisk, every so often, I'd glance back with my flashlight, and he'd still be there. Not gaining, not lagging, just there. It made the rest of the walk feel tense and heavy. No matter how fast or slow we moved, he stayed behind us. Eventually, we reached the end of the cliff walk and started moving quickly through the grassy trail that led back to the car. And sure enough, that guy was still shadowing us, keeping right on our heels. Then, out of nowhere, we heard him call out something, like, "Where are you going?" Asterisk, that was it for me. This dude clearly wasn't just a random hiker. He wanted trouble. I didn't answer, and I told Soft to stay quiet too. He picked up the pace and walked side by side, trying not to panic. Asterisk, that's when we noticed 2 more figures stepping out from behind us. I didn't want to break into a run if they were looking for a reaction. Stat might have triggered it, but one of the new guys shouted something, though I couldn't make out what. By the time we reached the car, our adrenaline was off the charts. We scrambled to get in, and just as we slammed the door shut, we both screamed. Those 3 guys had closed in fast and were now right up against the car. I hit the lock button immediately, just before 2 of them yanked on the doors. Asterisk, I threw the car in reverse, since that was the only direction I could go without hitting one of them. Okay? As I backed up, they started banging on the sides of the car and even kicked it. But once we were moving, they didn't chase us. They just stood there, watching us drive away. Asterisk on the ride back. Both of us were dead silent. The panic gave way to shock. When I dropped Soph off, we barely said a word. We did hang out again after that plenty of times, actually, and we're still in touch. But that night still lingers in the back of my mind. It was just too close for comfort. Felt like something bad almost happened. Asterisk. Some of my friends think it might have been a gang. Crips, maybe. I don't know. And honestly, I don't care. I'm not going back out there at night again ever. My name's Gregory. That was a story my old friend Ian told me many times, something that happened to him years ago or recently. It's always given me chills. Asterisk, Ian's the kind of guy you only need to meet once to know he's the real deal. Early 50s, stocky build, sun-baked skin from decades of working near the ocean. He worked in marine salvage and coastal infrastructure if something broke near the shore. Ian was usually the guy you'd call to go fix it. Asterisk, but he wasn't just a contractor. He'd been a diver, a ship tech, even did remote inspections for government agencies. The man had seen it all. So when he told me this next story, I believed every word. It happened in 2013. He'd been hired by a small county in Washington state to inspect an old. Developers wanted to level it. Preservationists wanted to restore it. The county, they didn't want to deal with it, so they sent Ian in to figure out whether the place was even worth saving. Asterisk. The lighthouse stood on a lonely rock island about an hour offshore. The island itself was barely more than a chunk of stone and dirt, maybe 300 feet across. No docks, no buildings other than the lighthouse, an old generator shed, and some rusted scaffolding. For 4 days, a sleeping bag, tools, a clipboard, and a marine radio. He was supposed to be dropped off on Monday morning and picked up Thursday afternoon. He'd done this sort of thing more times than he could count. Going solo was normal. Asterisk, when he arrived, the place was dead quiet, cold and gray, but peaceful. Ugh. The air carried the usual blend of salt, rust, poof, and rot that you'd expect from a site long left to the elements. Asterisk, the lighthouse stood about 50 feet tall, built in the early 1900s. Classic spiral staircase inside, with the old beacon lens still up top, though it hadn't worked in years. Structurally, it looked solid. Asterisk, Ian started his inspection right away, checking beams, stairs, window frames. The lower floorboards were warped, but still held weight. The third floor had a tiny sleeping area that hadn't been touched in decades. He decided to set up his sleeping bag near the generator room on the ground level, where it was warmer and more sheltered from the wind. The first night, nothing happened. It was silent, almost too silent, Ian said. You don't realize how much ambient noise you're used to until it's gone. No birds, no bugs, not even waves lapping the rocks. Just the wind, and even that was soft. Asterisk, on day 2, a thick fog rolled in. Ian woke to a wall of white outside. Visibility was down to a few feet. He'd seen fog before, but this was different. He described it like a solid sheet, not mist. Still, he didn't think much of it. That coast gets foggy. Asterisk, he spent most of the day inspecting the upper stairwell. That's when he noticed something odd. There was a small maintenance closet built into the wall about halfway up the stairs. On day 1, it had been sealed, shot to hinges, too rusted to move. Asterisk, now, it was cracked open. Just an inch, but enough to tell it had shifted. Ian figured maybe the damp air loosened it, but it didn't sit right with him. He pushed the door open and shone his flashlight inside. Asterisk, the closet was pitch black, but in the far corner, he spotted something, a wooden box, about the size of a lunchbox. It was coated in this damp, slimy, moss-like. It had just been dredged from the ocean floor. Ian didn't open it. He just shut the closet door again and made a note to include it in his report. Asterisk, that night, something woke him, but it wasn't a noise. It was the lack of noise that did it. He said it was as if the whole world suddenly muted. No wind, no creaks, no ambient sounds at all, just stillness. And then he heard footsteps on the metal staircase above him. Asterisk, at first, he assumed it might have been an animal that somehow got inside. But then he realized something odd. The footsteps weren't coming down. They were going up, climbing higher into the tower. He switched on his flashlight and fixed it on the stairwell entrance, waiting, listening, asterisk, but nothing happened. Eventually, the footsteps stopped and the silence returned. The next morning, Ian searched the entire lighthouse from top to bottom. He opened every room, every cabinet, and even climbed onto the roof to check for signs of an intruder. But there was nothing. No signs of animals, no sign of anything unusual, except the box. It was no longer in the closet. Now it sat halfway out into the stairwell, still wet, still moss-covered, like it had been deliberately moved. Ian stood there for a long time, just staring at it, unsure what to do. Eventually, he picked it up. Asterisk, it was heavier than it looked. It's waterlogged wood, swollen and dense. The lid wouldn't open. It was sealed shut with old, rusted nails. Ian didn't want to force it. He left it at the base of the stairs and stepped outside for some air. That's when he saw the footprints. Asterisk, bare footprints. Human-sized, not boot prints or shoe tread, just the impression of wet, naked feet in the dirt around the lighthouse. They came from the north side of the building and led in a straight line toward the cliff's edge, and stopped. Asterisk, no returning tracks, just 10 or 12 clear, barefoot impressions that ended abruptly at a sheer drop into the sea below. Asterisk, he stood there, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone had made landfall. But that couldn't be right. No boats were scheduled until his pickup, and even then, navigating back in that thick fog would have been nearly impossible. Asterisk. He thought about using the radio to call for an early extraction, but knew the fog would make it a dangerous trip. Water was unpredictable in weather like that. Asterisk. So instead, he went back inside, locked every door and hatch he could find, and jammed an iron pipe through the stairwell door handle to keep it shut. Then he lay down and tried to sleep. But that night was worse. Around 1:30 a.m., he was jolted awake by a loud slam. The door to the beacon room above had been thrown shut with such force it rattled the tower and shook dust loose from the ceiling. Beams. Then came the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not on a door, not on a window, on the wall, from the inside. Like someone was standing just behind the bricks, pressing their knuckles against the plaster and tapping once, twice, 3 times. Asterisk. Ian didn't move. He stayed perfectly still, staring into the dark, heart pounding. The knocking stopped, and eventually, morning came. Asterisk. When the sun rose, he got up to check everything again. The box was gone, and the closet door now swung completely open. Asterisk. At that point, Ian knew without question he wasn't alone. Asterisk. He grabbed the radio and called in, requesting immediate pickup. He didn't go into detail, just told them it was a medical issue and he needed extraction now. Asterisk. The fog was still thick as ever, but dispatch said they'd try to get a boat to him within a few hours. He packed up his gear and waited at the landing ledge. Time dragged. The fog didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier, and sat there for nearly 7 hours, wrapped in damp cold, unable to see more than a few feet in any direction. The sun was sinking, the temperature dropping, and the silence was oppressive. Asterisk. Then he heard it. Someone walking on the gravel behind him, over near the base of the lighthouse. He turned immediately, but there was no one. Or maybe someone was there, and he just couldn't see them through the fog. That was enough. He backed away to the cliff's edge and waited there, clutching his pack until the distant sound of a boat horn cut through the murk. The relief crew arrived just after nightfall. When he stepped onto the deck, the crewman who helped him up asked why he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Ian just muttered something about the place being unsafe. Back at the office, he filed a short report. Officially, the lighthouse was compromised and not safe for further inspection. But he left out the other details. The footsteps, the box, the knocking, all of it. He told me once that he didn't include those things because by then he'd started to wonder if maybe the isolation had just gotten to him. Maybe it was all in his head. That's where his written account ended. Ian never returned to the lighthouse. He wrapped up the rest of his contracts that year, and within months, he'd quietly stepped away from field work altogether. Said he was ready to stick to dry land from now on. I asked him once if that decision had anything to do with what happened out there. He just gave a shrug and said, "I've seen enough out there." But the one thing he said that's always stuck with me. When I pressed him on what he believed was going on. He looked at me, dead serious, and said, "Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. They just need time and silence." That was all he ever gave me. I tried to do some digging on my own later. Tried to find records of the place. Anything? The coordinates he gave me in his notes point to a blank patch of ocean. There's a vague mention in some dusty county record of an old beacon tower out that way, but no name, no history, no photos. It's as if the place never existed. And that's what unsettles me most, not what Ian said, but what nobody else ever has. I still don't know whether I should hope Ian imagined the whole thing or pray that he didn't.